Most people fail quietly, but not in the way you think. They don't fail because they lack talent. They don't fail because life is unfair. They fail because their effort is public and their discipline is private only when it's weak. They announce goals before earning them. They seek encouragement before building proof. They want recognition before results. And because of that, their discipline collapses the moment nobody is watching. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The most powerful transformations in the world are invisible while they're happening. Nobody claps while you're forming self-control. Nobody notices while you're resisting comfort. Nobody rewards you for showing up on days when motivation is dead. And that's exactly why it works. Private discipline is what you do when no one can validate you. It's the ability to keep standards without witnesses, to execute without praise, to suffer without storytelling. Most people can act disciplined when someone is watching. Almost no one can do it in silence. This audiobook is not here to motivate you. Motivation fades. This is about building a system that functions even when you don't feel like it. A system that doesn't need inspiration, likes, or approval. A system that keeps working when enthusiasm dies. If you're looking for comfort, stop listening now. But if you're ready to build something real, something quiet, something permanent, then listen carefully, because what you build in private will eventually control your public life. Chapter 1. The Illusion of Motivation. Motivation is unreliable. Anyone who tells you otherwise is selling you something. Motivation depends on mood, environment, sleep, praise, and emotional comfort. It rises when things feel good and disappears the moment they don't. Discipline does not work like that. Discipline is a decision made once and enforced, repeatedly, regardless of how you feel about it. Most people misunderstand this from the beginning. They believe motivation is the engine and discipline is the backup. In reality, motivation is a spark, and discipline is the engine. A spark can start a fire, but it cannot keep it burning. That's why people start strong and fade fast. They confuse excitement with commitment. Think about how motivation actually behaves. One day, you wake up energized, optimistic, ready to change your life. The next day, you're tired, distracted, irritated, or bored. Nothing dramatic happened. Life simply showed up, and suddenly the plan feels heavier. That's when motivation fails, not because you are weak, but because motivation was never designed to carry weight. Most people wait to feel ready. They wait to feel confident. They wait to feel inspired. They tell themselves, "I'll start when I'm in the right headspace." That waiting is the reason they stay stuck. Readiness becomes an excuse, disguised as self-awareness. Confidence becomes a requirement that never arrives. Inspiration becomes a drug they keep chasing. They confuse emotional readiness with structural readiness. Emotional readiness is how you feel. Structural readiness is whether your system is set up to work regardless of feelings. People who rely on emotions wait. People who rely on structure move. They believe that once they feel motivated, action will follow. In reality, action is what creates motivation, not the other way around. Motivation is often the reward, not the prerequisite. You don't feel motivated and then act. You act, see progress, and then motivation appears as a side effect. This is why the first step always feels the hardest. There is no feedback yet, no proof, no momentum. The mind resists because it doesn't see immediate payoff. Discipline steps in precisely here. Discipline says you move first. Feelings follow later. Private discipline means acting without emotional permission. It means doing the work even when the internal dialogue is loud, negative, or exhausted. Especially then, because those are the moments that actually shape you. When you only act when you feel good, you train yourself to be controlled by your feelings. Your emotions become the authority. They decide when you work, when you rest, when you quit. Over time, this makes you fragile. Small discomforts feel unbearable because you've taught yourself that discomfort is a signal to stop. When you act despite your feelings, you train yourself to control them. You prove to your mind that emotions are information, not commands. You show yourself that discomfort can exist without dictating behavior. This is a critical psychological shift. It builds self-trust. Self-trust doesn't come from positive affirmations. It comes from evidence. Every time you follow through when you didn't feel like it, you collect evidence that you are reliable. Every time you quit because you didn't feel motivated, you collect evidence that you are not. Over time, these small votes determine how seriously you take your own promises. This is why motivated people quit and disciplined people don't. Motivation negotiates. Discipline does not. Motivation asks how you feel today. Discipline asks what needs to be done and does it anyway. Motivation says, you've had a long day, you deserve rest. Discipline says, rest is scheduled later. This comes first. Motivation says, you can skip today and make up for it tomorrow. Discipline says today counts. Motivation looks for comfort. Discipline looks for alignment. This doesn't mean discipline is cruel or extreme. It means discipline is honest. It understands that consistency beats intensity. It understands that waiting for perfect conditions is a losing strategy. It understands that progress is built through ordinary days, not heroic bursts. A disciplined system removes decision-making from moments of weakness. You don't wake up and debate whether to do the work. The decision was already made. The schedule exists. The rules are clear. You follow them like gravity, not like a debate. This is why private discipline is so powerful. No one is there to cheer you on. No one is there to shame you if you fail. You are alone with your standards. That isolation forces clarity. Either you keep your word or you don't. There is no performance, only truth. If your system depends on motivation, it will collapse the moment life becomes inconvenient. Stress, boredom, failure, and fatigue are guaranteed. A motivation-based system cannot survive them. It was never designed to. Private discipline builds systems that survive emotional fluctuations. Systems that expect low-energy days and plan for them. Systems that don't rely on feeling inspired to function. Systems that make progress boring, predictable, and inevitable. This is the foundation of real progress. Not excitement, not hype, not constant positivity, but quiet, repeated execution when nobody is watching and nothing feels dramatic. Once you understand this, you stop chasing motivation. You stop waiting to feel ready. You stop asking your emotions for permission. You act first. You let motivation catch up later. And when it does, it's no longer fragile. It's backed by structure, proof, and discipline that works even in silence. Chapter 2. Silence is a weapon. Most people talk too much about what they're going to do. They mistake expression for execution. They announce goals, plans, routines, and transformations before anything real has happened. And every time they do, they weaken themselves without realizing it. Silence is not emptiness. Silence is pressure. Silence is restraint. Silence is a weapon. When you speak about your goals too early, your brain receives a small reward. It feels acknowledged. It feels seen. That feeling tricks you into believing progress has been made, but nothing has changed. No work has been done. No habit has been formed. Yet the mind relaxes as if it has already moved forward. This is dangerous. Talking creates emotional closure without results. It releases tension that should have been converted into action. Instead of using discomfort as fuel, People dissolve it through conversation. They explain their plans, justify their intentions, and seek reassurance. The moment they do that, the internal urgency drops. Private discipline works differently. It keeps the pressure inside. When you don't talk about what you're building, there is no relief valve. No one knows. No one expects anything. No one praises you for trying. The only way to release the pressure is to do the work. That pressure sharpens focus. Silence also removes performance from the equation. When people know what you're trying to do, your behavior subtly shifts. You start acting for approval. You want progress that looks impressive, not progress that is effective. You choose visible effort over necessary effort. When you work in silence, your choices become cleaner. You do what actually matters, not what looks good. You stop optimizing for appearance and start optimizing for results. This is rare, and that's why it's powerful. Silence protects your energy. Not everyone deserves access to your plans. Some people doubt you openly. Others doubt you quietly. Some project their fears onto you. Others unintentionally weaken you by treating your goals casually. Even supportive people can dilute your focus by turning your discipline into a conversation instead of a commitment. Private discipline removes all of that noise. No opinions, no reactions, no external feedback loop, just you and the work. There's also a deeper psychological benefit to silence. When nobody knows what you're doing, quitting becomes invisible. That sounds dangerous, but it's actually revealing. Without public accountability, the only thing keeping you moving is internal standards. This exposes whether your discipline is real or performative. If you only follow through when someone is watching, then you are not disciplined. Private discipline asks a harder question. What do you do when no one will ever know whether you showed up or not? That question forces honesty. It strips away ego and leaves only character. Silence also builds patience. When you stop announcing progress, you stop expecting immediate recognition. You accept that effort may go unnoticed for a long time. This trains delayed gratification, which is one of the most valuable traits a person can develop. People who need quick acknowledgement burn out. People who can wait quietly compound. Think about how real power forms. It doesn't arrive with noise. It accumulates slowly, invisibly, through repeated effort that no one applauds. By the time it becomes visible, it feels sudden to outsiders. But for the person who built it, it feels inevitable. This is why the quiet ones always seem ahead. They weren't lucky. They weren't hiding talent. They were hiding effort. Silence also prevents premature identity inflation. When you tell people what you're working on, they start seeing you differently. They label you. That label can become a trap. You start protecting the image instead of doing the work required to earn it. Private discipline delays identity until it's unavoidable. You don't call yourself disciplined. You don't call yourself focused. You don't call yourself improved. You let your behavior prove it first. That keeps your ego small and your standards high. There is strength in being underestimated. When no one expects anything from you, you are free to build without pressure. You can fail quietly. You can adjust. You can learn without embarrassment. Silence gives you room to grow without judgment. This doesn't mean isolation from everyone. It means selectivity. It means choosing not to broadcast every step. It means understanding that some processes are weakened by exposure. Private discipline thrives in environments where attention is low and effort is consistent. Eventually, results begin to surface. People notice changes. Your habits are different. Your reactions are calmer. Your confidence is quieter. They ask what you've been doing. They're surprised because they didn't see the work. That surprise is the proof that silence worked. By the time results speak, you no longer need to explain. You don't feel the urge to justify your journey. The discipline is already integrated. It doesn't depend on recognition. Silence was never about secrecy for its own sake. It was about protecting focus, pressure, and integrity, long enough for real change to take root. Talk less. Do more. Let silence carry the weight until results can speak for you. That is why silence is not weakness. It is a weapon. Chapter 3. The standard you keep alone. Who you are when no one is watching matters more than anything you do in public. Not because it feels noble, but because it is the only place where truth exists. When there is no deadline, no praise, no punishment, no audience, the standard you keep in those moments defines your future far more accurately than any goal you announce. Most people confuse rules with standards. Rules are external. They exist because someone else enforces them. Standards are internal. They exist because you refuse to drop below them even when you could. Rules disappear when authority disappears. Standards remain. This is where private discipline lives. When no one is checking your work, it becomes easy to loosen effort. When there is no immediate consequence, shortcuts feel harmless. When nobody will ever know you skipped, delayed, or compromised, the temptation is strong, and in those moments, you are voting for the kind of person you are becoming. People often ask why their progress feels inconsistent. The answer is usually simple. Their standards are conditional. They perform well when pressure is applied and relax when it's removed. They confuse intensity under observation with discipline. But discipline is what survives when pressure is gone. Ask yourself a hard question. If no one ever praised you, corrected you, or rewarded you, would you still do the work the same way? If the answer is no, then your discipline is borrowed. It belongs to the environment, not to you. The standard you keep alone determines your ceiling. Public effort can impress people. Private standards shape identity. Most people let standards slip quietly. They don't fail dramatically. They lower expectations one small decision at a time. One skipped session. One delayed task. One excuse that feels reasonable in the moment. Each decision feels insignificant, but together they form a pattern, and patterns become character. Private discipline requires you to define what non-negotiable actually means. Not in theory, but in behavior. What do you do even when you are tired? What do you refuse to skip, even when skipping would be easy? Where do you draw the line when no one is enforcing it? This is uncomfortable work because it removes excuses. You can't blame circumstances when no one else is involved. You can't hide behind potential. You are faced with a simple truth. Either you respect your own standards, or you don't. People who grow resentful toward discipline often misunderstand it. They think discipline is punishment. It isn't. Discipline is self-respect made visible. It's saying, I keep promises to myself even when it costs me comfort. That builds quiet confidence. Not arrogance, not bravado. Confidence rooted in consistency. When your standards are clear, decisions become simpler. You don't waste energy debating. You don't argue with yourself. You already know what is acceptable and what is not. That clarity reduces mental friction. It saves time. It conserves willpower. Most people exhaust themselves negotiating with their own standards. They wake up and bargain. They justify. They rationalize. By the time they decide, they are already drained. Private discipline removes that negotiation. The decision was made earlier. Today, you simply execute. There is also a psychological cost to lowering standards in private. Every time you compromise, you weaken trust with yourself. That erosion is subtle but powerful. You begin to doubt your follow-through. You stop setting ambitious goals because deep down you don't believe you'll honor them. On the other hand, every time you uphold a standard, when no one is watching, you strengthen internal trust. You don't need motivation speeches. You don't need reminders. You know who you are, because your behavior has proven it repeatedly. This is why people with strong private discipline appear calm under pressure. They are not scrambling to become someone in public. They already are someone in private. Standards must be realistic, but firm. Private discipline is not about perfection. It's about consistency. Missing once is not failure. Lowering the standard is. There is a difference between slipping and redefining what you tolerate. Discipline corrects slips. Weakness justifies them. You don't rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your standards. Goals are aspirations. Standards are constraints. They determine what behaviors are allowed into your life. And constraints, not wishes, shape outcomes. When standards are high, behavior follows. When standards are vague, effort dissolves. Private discipline asks you to live in alignment even when it's inconvenient, even when nobody will know, even when it feels unfair. That alignment creates internal coherence. You are no longer split between who you say you are and how you act. Eventually, this shows, not loudly, not dramatically, but unmistakably. Your decisions become faster. Your habits stabilize. Your confidence no longer depends on external reassurance. And when life applies pressure, as it always does, you don't collapse. Because you're not relying on mood, supervision, or praise. You're relying on a standard you've already proven you can keep alone. That is real discipline. Quiet, unseen, uncompromising. And it is built when no one is watching. Chapter 4. Pain without an audience. There is a kind of pain that builds nothing. Loud pain, performative pain, pain that looks for witnesses, sympathy, or recognition. And then there is another kind of pain, quieter and far more powerful. Pain without an audience, pain that sharpens instead of weakens, pain that leaves no record but leaves behind strength. Most people avoid pain unless it comes with validation. They are willing to struggle as long as someone sees it, as long as effort is noticed, as long as sacrifice is acknowledged. The moment pain becomes invisible, motivation collapses. This reveals something uncomfortable. They were not committed to growth. They were committed to being seen growing. Private discipline requires a different relationship with pain. When no one is watching, pain loses its drama. There is no applause for waking up early, no sympathy for resisting temptation, no praise for showing up tired. The work feels heavier because there is no emotional reward attached to it, and that is exactly why it works. Pain without an audience forces you to deal with discomfort internally. You cannot outsource it through storytelling. You cannot soften it through explanation. You must carry it yourself. This builds emotional endurance, which is far more valuable than motivation. Emotional endurance is the ability to continue functioning even when things feel heavy, dull, frustrating, or unfair. Most people lack this skill. They panic when discomfort lasts too long. They interpret prolonged difficulty as a sign that something is wrong. Discipline teaches you the opposite. Discomfort is not a warning. It is a condition. Every meaningful pursuit includes periods of sustained discomfort, not dramatic struggle, boring strain, quiet resistance, repeated effort with little feedback. People who cannot tolerate this quit early. People who can tolerate it grow dangerous. Private pain also removes entitlement. When no one is there to congratulate you, you stop expecting reward for effort alone. You understand that effort is the price, not the prize. This shifts your mindset. You no longer ask, "What do I get for this?" You ask, "Is this required?" That mindset creates resilience. Public struggle invites comfort. People encourage you, they reassure you, they soften the experience. While support can be helpful, it can also weaken your capacity to self-regulate. If you always need someone to remind you that it's worth it, you become dependent. Private discipline teaches you to self-soothe without quitting, to calm yourself without excuses, to continue without reassurance. This is not emotional coldness, it is emotional competence. There is also clarity that comes from pain without witnesses. When no one is watching, you cannot perform. You cannot exaggerate effort. You cannot dramatize fatigue. You face the work honestly. Either you do it or you don't. That honesty builds integrity. Integrity is alignment between behavior and values. When no one is enforcing them, it's easy to appear strong in public. It's hard to remain consistent in private discomfort. That's why integrity is rare. Pain without an audience also strengthens self-respect. Every time you endure something difficult quietly, you tell yourself, I can handle this. That message compounds. Over time, you stop fearing discomfort because you've survived it repeatedly. This is why people with private discipline move differently. They are not rushed. They are not reactive. They don't over-explain. They have already faced themselves in silence. External pressure feels lighter by comparison. Most people try to avoid pain. Disciplined people choose which pain to accept. They understand that avoiding short-term discomfort creates long-term suffering. Choosing controlled pain now prevents chaotic pain later. This is not about self-punishment. It's about intelligent trade-offs. You accept the discomfort of consistency so you don't have to live with the discomfort of regret. You accept the pain of restraint so you don't have to deal with the pain of damage control. Private pain also builds patience. When nothing is acknowledged, you stop expecting quick results. You learn to measure progress internally. You track consistency instead of outcomes. This reduces anxiety and increases persistence. People who constantly seek feedback burn out. People who can work without feedback compound quietly. Think about the moments that truly changed you. They were likely not celebrated. They were moments where you chose discipline over comfort, when no one would have blamed you for choosing otherwise. Those moments didn't look impressive, but they rewired you. Private discipline is built in those moments. The world celebrates visible struggle because it's easy to understand. Quiet endurance is harder to recognize. But quiet endurance is what actually produces strength. Eventually, the effects show. Not because you announce them, but because your capacity has expanded. What once felt unbearable now feels manageable. What once required effort now feels normal. That is adaptation. That is growth. And when people finally notice your calm, your control, your consistency, they won't see the pain that built it. They'll assume it was natural. They'll call it confidence. They'll call it discipline. They won't know that it was forged in moments of unseen discomfort, carried without complaint, endured without applause. That's fine. Pain without an audience was never meant to be seen. It was meant to change you. Chapter 5. Delayed Identity. Most people want the identity before they earn it. They want to feel disciplined before they act disciplined. They want to be confident before they build competence. They want to be respected before they prove reliability. This impatience creates a fragile self-image that collapses under pressure. Private discipline delays identity on purpose. Identity is powerful. Once you label yourself, your mind works to protect that label. But if the label comes before the behavior, it becomes a performance. You start defending the image instead of building the reality behind it. People say, I'm disciplined, while negotiating with themselves every morning. They say, I'm focused, while getting distracted at the first sign of discomfort. They say, I'm serious this time, while waiting for motivation to return. These identities are unearned, and unearned identities are unstable. Delayed identity works differently. You don't claim the trait until your behavior has proven it repeatedly. You let actions accumulate quietly until the identity becomes unavoidable. At that point, the label doesn't inflate your ego, it reflects your reality. This delay is uncomfortable because humans crave recognition. We want to be seen as improving. We want others to acknowledge change. But premature identity satisfaction robs you of hunger. Once the mind feels like it has arrived, effort drops. Private discipline keeps you hungry. When you stop telling yourself who you are becoming, you focus on what you are doing today. The work stays grounded. There is no need to live up to a self-image. There is only execution. This also reduces internal conflict. When people adopt an identity too early, every mistake feels threatening. A single failure creates anxiety because it contradicts the image they are trying to protect. They either overreact or quit entirely. Delayed identity removes that pressure. You are allowed to fail without identity collapse because nothing has been claimed yet. You are simply someone who is practicing a standard. That mindset is resilient. Over time, something shifts. The behaviors repeat. The standards hold. The discipline becomes automatic. At that point, the identity forms naturally, without effort. You don't need to convince yourself or anyone else. You simply notice that you act differently now. This is how real confidence forms, not from declarations, but from evidence. There is also humility built into delayed identity. You don't feel superior. You don't feel the need to compare. You are too focused on consistency to worry about labels. This keeps you grounded and reduces ego-driven mistakes. Most people underestimate how much energy identity management consumes. When you are constantly thinking about who you are or how you appear, attention is pulled away from the work. Private discipline frees that energy by postponing identity until it is earned. Delayed identity also strengthens self-trust. Every time you act without claiming credit, you reinforce internal alignment. You begin to believe in your capacity to follow through. Not because you said you would, but because you did. This changes how you set goals. You stop over-promising. You stop dramatizing intention. You focus on what you can sustain, not what sounds impressive. That realism increases long-term success. People who rush identity often burn out. They try to live up to a version of themselves they haven't built yet. People who delay identity build quietly and step into it naturally when the time comes. Think of it like compound interest. Small, consistent behaviors accumulate. At first, the growth is invisible. Then, suddenly the numbers change. The same happens with identity. At some point, discipline stops feeling forced. It feels normal. That is when identity has arrived. When others finally notice, they may say you changed. But from your perspective, it doesn't feel like a transformation. It feels like alignment. You simply stopped pretending and started becoming. Private discipline teaches you to let identity be a result, not a starting point. You don't need to announce who you are becoming. You don't need to adopt titles prematurely. You just need to keep standards long enough that the identity forms on its own. And when it does, it is stable. It doesn't need validation. It doesn't collapse under stress. It doesn't require constant reinforcement. It just is. That is the power of delayed identity. Chapter 6. Boredom is the test. Most people believe the hardest part of discipline is starting. That's wrong. Starting is emotional. It's exciting. It's fueled by hope, novelty, and imagination. The real test comes later, when everything becomes ordinary. Boredom is where discipline is exposed. After the initial excitement fades, after progress slows, after the routine becomes familiar, boredom arrives. There is no rush, no urgency, no emotional reward, just repetition. This is the phase where most people disappear. Boredom feels harmless. but it is dangerous. Difficulty at least feels meaningful. Boredom feels pointless. It makes you question whether the effort is worth it. It whispers that you've plateaued, that nothing is changing, that you deserve a break. And because nothing dramatic is happening, quitting feels justified. Private discipline survives boredom because it is not dependent on stimulation. It does not need novelty to function. It understands that progress is often quiet, slow, and repetitive. The disciplined person shows up not because today feels important, but because the system requires it. This is where professionals separate from amateurs. Amateurs need to feel engaged. Professionals need to be consistent. When boredom sets in, many people start modifying the plan unnecessarily. They chase new methods, new routines, new strategies, not because the old ones stopped working, but because they stopped feeling exciting. This constant switching resets progress and keeps them stuck in the beginner phase. Private discipline resists this impulse. It recognizes boredom as a signal to stay, not to escape. Boredom often means the work is deep enough to matter. It means the behavior is stabilizing. It means you are no longer entertained by the process, only committed to it. There is a quiet confidence that develops when you can tolerate boredom. You stop needing every day to feel meaningful. You trust the process, even when you don't feel progress. That trust reduces anxiety and increases persistence. Boredom also forces honesty. Without emotional highs, you see the work clearly. There is no illusion of momentum. You are confronted with a simple choice: continue or quit. No drama, no justification, just a decision. People who can endure boredom build something rare: patience. Patience is not passive. It is active restraint. It is the ability to keep doing the right thing without immediate feedback. That ability compounds over time. Most breakthroughs happen after long periods of boredom, not because boredom creates results directly, but because boredom filters out those who are not serious. When others leave, the path clears. Progress accelerates simply because you stayed. Private discipline reframes boredom. Instead of seeing it as a problem, it sees it as confirmation. If the work were exciting forever, everyone would do it. If the process constantly rewarded you emotionally, it wouldn't build character. Boredom is the cost of entry for long-term results. This is also where identity solidifies. When you continue despite boredom, discipline stops feeling like effort. It becomes habit. Habits require less energy than decisions. Once this happens, consistency becomes easier, not harder. People who quit during boredom stay dependent on motivation. People who stay become self-sustaining. Boredom trains focus. When stimulation drops, attention sharpens. You stop multitasking. You stop chasing distraction. You learn to sit with the task until it's done. This ability is increasingly rare in a world designed to distract you. That rarity is an advantage. Eventually, boredom fades, not because the work changes, but because you change. Your tolerance increases. Your expectations adjust. What once felt dull now feels normal. That normalization is progress. When others look for excitement, you look for consistency. When others need novelty, you rely on structure. When others quit because it no longer feels inspiring, you continue because it no longer needs to. This is why boredom is not an obstacle. It is a gatekeeper. Most people turn back here. A few walk through. Those few build lives that look effortless from the outside, not because the work was easy, but because they stayed long after the excitement ended. Private discipline passes the boredom test, and once you pass it, very little can stop you. Chapter 7. When it finally shows, for a long time, nothing seems to happen. That is the part nobody prepares you for. You do the work, you keep the standards. You endure boredom, You carry discomfort quietly, and still from the outside, your life looks the same. No dramatic shift, no sudden recognition, no obvious payoff. This is where many people panic. They assume silence means failure. They assume invisibility means wasted effort. They assume that if results haven't shown yet, something must be wrong. They are mistaken. Private discipline works on a delayed timeline. It changes you before it changes your circumstances. And until that internal shift is complete, external results remain quiet. At first, the changes are subtle. You notice them before anyone else does. Your reactions slow down. You don't get triggered as easily. You stop explaining yourself. You stop rushing. Your decisions feel calmer, firmer, more deliberate. These changes don't impress people, but they matter more than visible success. Then something else happens. Your tolerance increases. Things that used to overwhelm you now feel manageable. Situations that once drained you no longer control you. You don't need as much emotional reassurance. You don't seek permission to act. You trust yourself more because you've proven, repeatedly, that you follow through. This internal stability is the real result. Most people try to force results early. They rush exposure. They seek validation prematurely. They want proof before the foundation is set. That impatience weakens them. When results finally do arrive, they are not equipped to handle them. Pressure breaks them because discipline was never fully integrated. Private discipline avoids this mistake. It prepares you quietly. When results finally begin to show, they don't arrive with noise. They arrive as consistency. Opportunities stick. Progress holds. Gains don't disappear. The moment conditions change. What you build lasts because it is supported by habits, not emotion. Others will notice something is different. They may not know what. They'll say you seem more confident, more focused, more controlled. They'll ask what changed. Some will expect a simple answer, a book, a routine, a mindset shift. They won't see the years of unrecorded effort, the nights you chose restraint, the mornings you honored standards without witnesses, the countless times you acted without motivation. That work is invisible by design, and that invisibility is what made it effective. By the time results are visible, discipline is no longer something you are trying to maintain. It is already part of how you live. You don't fear losing momentum because momentum is no longer emotional. It's structural. This is the moment where many people finally relax, not because they've achieved everything, but because they no longer feel fragile. They know that even if circumstances change, they will respond correctly. That confidence is quiet and grounded. There is also a shift in how you relate to recognition. When praise comes late, after the work is done, it feels irrelevant. You don't need it. You appreciate it, but you're not fueled by it. Your standards no longer depend on external feedback. This is dangerous in the best way. It means you are no longer easily manipulated by attention, approval, or criticism. You are anchored internally. People who skipped private discipline often struggle here. When attention arrives, they become reactive. When pressure increases, they fold. When expectations rise, they burn out. Their success is noisy but unstable. Yours is quiet but durable. Another thing changes when it finally shows your pace. You stop rushing. You are no longer desperate to prove anything. You understand that consistency compounds and shortcuts collapse. You move with patience because you've seen the timeline play out. That patience intimidates people who are still chasing quick wins. They mistake your calm for complacency. They don't realize it's control. Private discipline also changes how you fail, because failure is no longer identity threatening. You don't panic. You don't spiral. You adjust and continue. Failure becomes data, not drama. This is one of the clearest signs that the system is working. Eventually, people may try to copy what they see. They'll ask about routines, habits, or mindset. Some will try briefly. Most will quit early because they are copying the visible result, not the invisible process that created it. And that's fine. Private discipline was never meant to be crowded. You'll also notice something else. You stop needing to talk about discipline at all. You don't feel the urge to preach. You don't try to convince others. You understand that discipline cannot be explained into existence. It has to be lived. The irony is that when it finally shows, you care less about being seen than ever before. The work already gave you what you needed. External results are simply confirmation, not validation. This is the final transformation. You are no longer chasing control. You have it, not over life, but over yourself. And that is the only control that matters. Nobody saw the process. They only see the outcome. They assume it was talent, luck, timing, or personality. They will never fully understand that it was built through private discipline, enforced in silence, sustained through boredom, and hardened by pain without witnesses. And that's exactly why it works. Because what is built quietly cannot be easily taken from you. And once it finally shows, it doesn't disappear, it stays. Chapter 7. What you protect becomes permanent. At some point, discipline stops feeling like effort and starts feeling like ownership. This is the phase almost nobody talks about. Because it doesn't look dramatic. There is no transformation montage, no before and after moment. Just a quiet realization you no longer live at the mercy of your impulses. This is where private discipline becomes permanent. Most people think success is about building something new. In reality, it's about protecting what you've built long enough that it becomes untouchable. Getting disciplined is hard. Staying disciplined is harder. Not because the work gets more intense, but because complacency becomes tempting. When results start to show, danger appears. You've proven to yourself that you can do it. You've earned confidence, and confidence, if unmanaged, turns into relaxation. Relaxation turns into lowered standards. Lowered standards quietly dismantle everything you worked for. Private discipline evolves at this stage. It's no longer about forcing yourself to act. It's about defending your standards from erosion. You stop asking, how do I push harder? And start asking, what do I refuse to lose? That shift matters, because discipline that depends on intensity burns out. Discipline that depends on protection lasts. You begin to notice subtle threats, not obvious ones like failure or chaos, but comfortable ones. Skipping once because things are going well. Letting routines slide because you feel established. Allowing distractions back in because you think you've earned flexibility. This is how people fall apart quietly. Private discipline recognizes that what built you must now be guarded. You don't loosen standards because life improved. You keep them because life improved as a result of them. This requires humility. You must accept that you are not cured. You are not immune. You are not above the process. The discipline that built you is the same discipline that must maintain you. People who abandon discipline after success mistake momentum for permanence. Momentum fades. Structure remains. This is also where discipline becomes less visible and more internal. You no longer need strict external rules. You've internalized them. You don't rely on rigid schedules to force action. You rely on identity-level alignment. You don't say, I should do this. You say, this is how I live. That distinction matters. At this stage, private discipline also reshapes how you relate to freedom. Most people believe discipline limits freedom. In reality, lack of discipline limits freedom. When impulses control you, your options shrink. When discipline controls you, your options expand. You can say no easily. You can delay gratification without resentment. You can choose discomfort intentionally, instead of being dragged into it by consequences. This is freedom. Most people never experience. Another shift happens here. You stop measuring progress emotionally. You don't ask whether you feel productive or inspired. You evaluate alignment. Did your actions match your standards today? That becomes the metric. This makes you resistant to chaos. Bad days don't derail you. Good days don't inflate you. You remain steady, calm, controlled. From the outside, this can look boring, predictable, unremarkable. From the inside, it feels powerful. Private discipline also changes your relationship with ambition. Early on, ambition is loud. It wants recognition. It wants proof. Later, ambition becomes quieter and more precise. You are no longer trying to become everything. You are protecting what matters. This precision increases effectiveness. You waste less energy. You say no more often. You focus deeper. The quality of your effort improves even if the quantity stabilizes. You also become more selective about influence. You pay attention to what enters your mind, conversations, media, environments. You understand that discipline is not just about what you do, but what you allow to shape you. This is an advanced form of discipline. Most people only think about action. Disciplined people think about exposure. What you repeatedly expose yourself to trains you, whether you intend it or not. Private discipline involves curating that exposure quietly. You don't announce boundaries. You enforce them. Over time, this creates insulation. Chaos doesn't reach you as easily. Trends don't pull you. Opinions don't shake you. You're grounded in standards that were tested in silence. This is also where envy disappears. When you are aligned internally, comparison loses its grip. You no longer feel threatened by others' success or distracted by others' pace. You understand your system. You trust your timeline. That trust is rare. People without private discipline are always reacting to news, to opinions, to emotions, to pressure. People with private discipline respond deliberately. They don't rush to prove. They don't rush to defend. They don't rush to change direction. They move with intention. Eventually, discipline becomes invisible even to you. You stop labeling it. You stop labeling it. You stop thinking about it. You simply live it. That's when it's truly embedded. At that point, losing it would feel unnatural. Skipping standards would feel wrong. Not morally, but structurally. Like trying to walk with a limp you don't have. This is permanence. And permanence changes how you face the future. Uncertainty doesn't scare you as much. You know you can adapt. Pressure doesn't intimidate you. You've handled worse internally. Setbacks don't define you. They're processed and corrected. Private discipline gives you something no external success ever can. Self-command. Not control over outcomes. Control over response. That's why it lasts. People may still misunderstand you. They may assume you're lucky. They may think you're naturally disciplined. They may believe you don't struggle. None of that matters. You know what it cost. You know what you protect. And you know that if everything external disappeared tomorrow, the internal structure would remain. That is the final proof. Private discipline was never about productivity. It was never about appearance. It was about building a version of yourself that doesn't collapse under pressure, doesn't rot in comfort, and doesn't drift without direction. You didn't set build it loudly. You didn't set build it quickly. You built it when nobody was watching. And because of that, it stays. Chapter Auto. Discipline after discipline. There's a point where discipline itself becomes a comfort zone. This is the stage almost no one warns you about. You've built structure, you've internalized standards, you operate with control, and because of that, a new risk appears: stagnation disguised as stability. Private discipline does not end when habits are formed. It enters a more subtle phase, a phase where the danger is no longer chaos, but rigidity. Early discipline is about survival. You are fighting distraction, inconsistency, and emotional weakness. Later discipline is about growth without losing control. That requires a different kind of awareness. Most people assume that once they are disciplined, the work is done. They treat discipline like a destination. But discipline is not a finish line. It is a living system. And any living system that is not adjusted eventually decays. This is where many disciplined people quietly plateau. They keep doing what once worked, not because it still serves them, but because it feels safe. Their routines become identity shields. Their habits become excuses. They confuse consistency with progress. Private discipline at this stage requires refinement. You must ask harder questions. Not am I disciplined, but is my discipline still honest? Not am I consistent, but am I still growing? These questions are uncomfortable because they threaten stability, but avoiding them leads to slow decline. True discipline includes the discipline to evolve. This doesn't mean abandoning structure. It means auditing it. You examine your routines not emotionally, but logically. Which behaviors are still building you? Which ones are merely preserving comfort? Which standards are protecting you? And which ones are limiting you? This level of self-assessment cannot be outsourced. No coach, book, or system can do it for you. It requires brutal self-honesty. The same honesty you used to build discipline in the first place. Another danger at this stage is pride. Quiet pride. The belief that you've figured it out. That belief shuts down learning. It hardens identity. And hardened identity resists necessary change. Private discipline keeps ego small, even when competence grows. You remind yourself that discipline is not proof of superiority. It is proof of maintenance. It does not make you special. It makes you functional. Forgetting this leads to arrogance, and arrogance leads to blind spots. Blind spots are where disciplined people fall hardest. There is also a shift in how effort feels. Early on, discipline is heavy. Later, it becomes efficient. You get more done with less emotional cost. This efficiency is good, but it can also reduce urgency. You must guard against drifting into autopilot. Autopilot is comfortable, but it is not conscious. Private discipline at this level requires intentional friction, small challenges, new constraints, controlled discomfort, not chaos, but pressure, enough to keep the system sharp. This might mean raising standards in one area while maintaining them in others. It might mean removing a convenience you've grown too attached to. It might mean confronting a weakness you've been ignoring, because everything else feels solid. Discipline that is never tested weakens. Another key shift is responsibility. When you are undisciplined, responsibility feels heavy. When you are disciplined, responsibility expands. People rely on you. Systems depend on you. Your actions have consequences beyond yourself. Private discipline now includes stewardship. You don't just manage your behavior, you manage your influence. Your words carry weight. Your presence sets tone. Your standards quietly shape environments. This is power, whether you seek it or not. And power without discipline decays quickly. At this stage, discipline becomes less about doing more and more about protecting clarity. You guard your attention fiercely. You become selective with commitments. You understand that saying yes too often weakens execution. This selectivity is not selfish. It is strategic. You also stop confusing busyness with usefulness. You measure impact, not activity. You cut what no longer compounds. This pruning can feel like loss, but it creates space for deeper work. Private discipline matures into restraint. Restraint from overexposure. Restraint from unnecessary conflict. Restraint from reacting to noise. You realize that not every opportunity deserves your energy. Not every opinion deserves your response. Silence returns, but now it is chosen, not enforced. There is also a deeper emotional discipline required here. You must manage success as carefully as failure. Success can distort judgment. It can invite distraction, entitlement, and complacency. Private discipline treats success as neutral, neither intoxicating nor threatening. You acknowledge it. You learn from it. Then you move on. At this level, discipline is less visible than ever. Others may not recognize it because it doesn't look like struggle. It looks like calm execution. It looks like measured decisions. It looks like consistency without drama. This is often misunderstood as ease. It is not ease. It is not ease. It is mastery. And mastery carries responsibility. The final evolution of private discipline is this. You no longer use discipline to control yourself. You use it to create conditions where control is rarely tested. Your life is structured in a way that supports your standards naturally. Temptation is reduced. Friction is intentional. Recovery is planned. You don't rely on willpower because you've engineered your environment. This is discipline at the systems level. Few people reach this stage because it requires patience, humility, and long-term thinking. But those who do rarely lose what they've built, even when life shifts, even when circumstances change. Because discipline is no longer something they do. It is something their life is built around, and that is the final form. Not discipline as effort. Not discipline as identity, but discipline as infrastructure. Quiet, invisible, permanent, built when nobody was watching, maintained when nobody was counting, and refined long after others stopped trying. Chapter 9. The discipline that outlives you. At the highest level, discipline stops being about personal achievement and starts becoming about continuity. This is where private discipline reaches its deepest form. It is no longer focused on how productive you are, how controlled you feel, or how successful you appear. It becomes about what remains stable, even when you are tired, distracted, aging, pressured, or no longer motivated to optimize yourself. Most people build discipline for a phase of life, a season, a goal, a recovery period. Very few build discipline that survives identity shifts, success, failure, boredom, loss, and time itself. That is the discipline that outlives you. This form of discipline is quiet, structural, and almost invisible. It does not rely on ambition. It does not rely on emotion. It does not even rely on self-belief. It relies on design. Earlier, discipline was something you enforced. Now it is something that continues even when you are not actively thinking about it. This is where many disciplined people unknowingly regress. They assume discipline is permanent once achieved. They underestimate entropy. Every system decays if it is not maintained, not dramatically, but slowly. Comfort creeps in, standards soften, attention fragments. The decline is subtle enough that it feels harmless until the structure weakens. Private discipline at this level means designing your life so that decay is slowed by default. You stop asking, "How strong is my willpower?" and start asking, "What survives when my willpower is low?" That question changes everything, because willpower is unreliable. Energy fluctuates, focus varies, circumstances shift, but structure endures. This is where discipline becomes architectural. You organize your life around constraints that protect what matters. You reduce unnecessary decisions. You standardize behavior where possible. You build rhythms that repeat regardless of mood. You stop relying on memory and intention and start relying on systems. This does not make life rigid. It makes it resilient. Most people believe freedom comes from flexibility. In reality, freedom comes from stability. When core behaviors are stable, the mind is free to adapt creatively elsewhere. When everything is negotiable, the mind is constantly exhausted. Private discipline at this stage is about conserving cognitive energy. You don't want to be strong all the time. You want to be consistent without effort. That requires letting go of ego. Ego wants to feel in control. It wants to feel impressive. It wants to feel like the hero of the story. But hero-based discipline collapses when the hero is tired. System-based discipline does not care who you are today. It works anyway. Another shift happens here. You stop centering discipline around self-improvement narratives. You are no longer trying to become better every day. That framing eventually becomes exhausting. Instead, you focus on preservation of alignment. You ask what behaviors must remain intact for my life to function well, regardless of my current goals. This is where discipline becomes boring in the best possible way. Boring systems survive crises. Exciting systems don't. Think about how many people fall apart after success, after failure, after loss, or after transition. They had discipline tied to a specific identity or goal. When that identity changed, the discipline collapsed with it. Private discipline that outlives you is identity agnostic. It does not depend on who you think you are. It depends on what you refuse to abandon. This level of discipline also changes how you relate to time. You stop optimizing for short-term outcomes. You think in decades. You think in terms of sustainability, not acceleration. You ask different questions. Not how fast can I grow, but what can I maintain for 20 years? Not how much can I push, but what will still work when I am less hungry, less intense, less driven? These questions remove ego from the equation and replace it with wisdom. Another uncomfortable truth emerges here. Discipline alone is not enough. If discipline is misdirected, it can preserve the wrong things. Private discipline at this stage requires values clarity. You must know what is worth preserving. Many people are disciplined about things that don't matter. They maintain routines that no longer serve them. They protect habits that were useful once, but are now obsolete. This is discipline without direction, and it leads to stagnation. The discipline that outlives you is selective. You choose a small number of principles that everything else aligns around: health, integrity, responsibility, focus. Whatever those are for you, they must be few and deeply internalized. Everything else is flexible. This selectivity prevents burnout and rigidity. It allows discipline to adapt without dissolving. At this stage, discipline also becomes transferable. Others benefit from it without you teaching them explicitly. Your behavior sets tone. Your consistency creates expectations. Your calm under pressure stabilizes environments. You don't need to lecture. You don't need to explain. The structure speaks for itself. This is where discipline quietly becomes leadership, not positional leadership. Structural leadership. People trust you because you are predictable in the best way. You do what you say. You respond instead of react. You don't collapse under stress. That reliability creates gravity. But this also introduces responsibility. When your discipline affects others, failure is no longer private. Sloppiness has ripple effects. Private discipline must expand to include stewardship. You now protect not just your own standards, but the standards of the systems you're part of. Family, work, teams, long-term projects. This requires restraint and foresight. You must resist the temptation to over-control. Discipline that becomes control suffocates others. The discipline that outlives you creates stability without domination. That balance is rare. Another challenge at this level is meaning. Early discipline is fueled by progress. Later discipline must be fueled by purpose. Not emotional purpose, but structural purpose. A clear reason why consistency matters beyond personal satisfaction. Without this, discipline decays into mechanical behavior, efficient but hollow. Purpose here does not mean grand legacy thinking. It means knowing why your standards exist and who they protect. Often, they protect future versions of yourself. Sometimes, they protect people who rely on you. Sometimes, they protect work that will outlast your involvement. This awareness deepens discipline. You no longer see skipped standards as personal failure. You see them as system damage. That perspective removes drama and increases responsibility. Repair becomes more important than guilt. At this stage, discipline also changes how you handle decline. Energy will eventually drop. Capacity will change. Priorities will shift. The discipline that outlives you accounts for this. You design systems that degrade gracefully. You allow for adjustment without collapse. You build in recovery, not as indulgence, but as necessity. This is discipline with compassion, not weakness. Most people swing between extremes, harsh self-control or total indulgence. Mature discipline integrates firmness with sustainability. It knows when to push and when to preserve. This is why it lasts. In the end, the highest form of private discipline is not impressive. It is reliable. It does not chase recognition. It does not seek validation. It does not need constant reinforcement. It simply continues. Long after motivation faded, long after excitement disappeared, long after nobody was watching, and when people look back, they won't see the discipline itself. They'll see a life that didn't fall apart, a trajectory that held steady, a person who remained consistent when others drifted. They may call it character, they may call it luck, they may call it temperament, but you will know the truth. It was built quietly, protected deliberately, refined patiently, and designed to survive even you. That is the discipline that outlives you, and once you build it, it does not ask for effort. It asks only to be respected. Chapter 10. Living under self-authority. There is a final transition that happens only after discipline has been built, protected, refined, and made structural. It is subtle, and because it is subtle, most people never notice when it happens. But once it does, you cannot unsee it. You stop living under circumstances, and you start living under self-authority. Self-authority is not arrogance. It is not dominance. It is not control over others. It is the quiet certainty that your behavior is governed internally, not negotiated externally. Your actions are no longer reactions to pressure, reward, fear, or approval. They are expressions of a code you enforce without witnesses. This is the end game of private discipline. Most people believe they are free because no one is directly controlling them. In reality, they are governed by impulses, moods, expectations, trends, and environment. Their behavior shifts depending on who is present, how they feel, or what is convenient. They are not ruled by a person, but they are ruled nonetheless. Private discipline replaces invisible rulers with self-authority. Self-authority means you do not need permission to act correctly. You do not need pressure to perform. You do not need supervision to maintain standards. You do not need praise to continue. You move because alignment demands it, not because consequences threaten you. This is a rare psychological state. At this level, discipline is no longer experienced as restriction. It is experienced as coherence. Your actions, values, and identity are no longer fighting each other. There is no internal negotiation, no constant friction, no exhaustion from self-betrayal. This is why disciplined people often appear calm. Calm is not the absence of stress. It is the absence of internal contradiction. When you live under self-authority, decisions simplify. You don't ask what will make you feel better today. You ask what maintains alignment long term. That question cuts through confusion quickly. And because decisions are simpler, regret decreases. Regret is not caused by failure. It is caused by acting against what you know is right. Self-authority eliminates most regret by removing self-deception. You may still fail. You may still misjudge, but you do not abandon your own standards in the process. That creates psychological stability. Another shift occurs here. You stop outsourcing responsibility for your state. Undisciplined people constantly look outward. They blame stress, circumstances, other people, or lack of motivation. Disciplined people accept influence without surrendering agency. You can be tired and still act correctly. You can be discouraged and still follow standards. You can be pressured and still choose restraint. That is self-authority in action. This does not make life easy. It makes it clean. Clean effort, clean failure, clean recovery. No excuses, no dramatization, no identity collapse. Living under self-authority also changes how you relate to rules. You don't rebel against rules, and you don't cling to them either. External rules become optional tools, not sources of identity. You follow them when they align. You ignore them when they don't, but you never abandon internal law. That internal law is what private discipline has been building all along. This is why people with self-authority are difficult to manipulate. Guilt does not work well on them. Praise does not control them. Fear does not rush them. They listen, they evaluate, and then they decide. That decision may look slow to outsiders. It may look stubborn. It may look indifferent. In reality, it is grounded. Self-authority also changes your relationship with time. You stop living reactively. Urgency no longer dictates behavior. You move when it is correct to move, not when anxiety spikes. This creates a strange effect. You appear patient in a world that is constantly rushing. That patience is often misinterpreted as lack of ambition. It is not. It is precision. You are no longer chasing outcomes blindly. You are positioning yourself deliberately. At this stage, discipline has fused with judgment. Judgment is the ability to choose correctly under uncertainty. Without discipline, judgment collapses under pressure. With discipline, judgment sharpens because it is not distorted by emotion. You don't need perfect information. You don't need guarantees. You rely on principles you've tested in silence that allows you to act decisively without panic. This is also where solitude becomes less threatening. You are no longer dependent on constant stimulation or validation. You can be alone with your thoughts without discomfort because your internal world is ordered. That order did not come naturally. It was built through years of private enforcement. Living under self-authority also changes how you experience temptation. Temptation does not disappear, but it loses power. You don't fight it aggressively. You don't dramatize it. You simply don't negotiate with it. Negotiation is what gives temptation leverage. When your standards are clear and internalized, temptation is informational, not persuasive. You notice it, and then you move on. That composure is a sign that discipline is no longer effort-based. This is also the stage where discipline becomes ethical, not moralistic, not performative, but ethical. You behave correctly even when it costs you advantage. even when shortcuts are available, even when compromise would go unnoticed. Because self-authority does not allow you to violate yourself. This is the highest cost of discipline and its greatest reward. You are no longer divided. Many people live fractured lives, one version of themselves in public, another in private, one set of standards when watched, another when alone. This fracture creates anxiety, guilt, and instability. Private discipline heals this fracture over time. When behavior is consistent across contexts, you feel whole. That wholeness is strength. It also changes how you end things. You don't quit impulsively. You don't stay out of fear. You end commitments cleanly, deliberately, without resentment or escape narratives. That maturity comes from self-authority. You own your exits as much as your entries. At this level, discipline does not make you rigid. It makes you trustworthy. Others know where you stand. They know what you tolerate. They know what you won't do. This clarity reduces conflict, and when conflict does arise, you handle it without emotional chaos. You don't escalate unnecessarily. You don't avoid out of fear. You address what needs to be addressed and move on. This is the behavioral signature of someone who governs themselves. Private discipline was never about productivity hacks or routines. Those were tools. The real objective was self-rule, to be the final authority over your actions, to live without needing constant external correction, to remain aligned under pressure, to act correctly even when nobody is counting. When you reach this point, discipline stops being something you think about. It becomes something others notice without understanding. They sense stability. They sense control. They sense reliability. They may ask how you do it. You will struggle to explain, because the truth is simple and unglamorous. You stopped negotiating with yourself. You enforced standards in private. You chose alignment over comfort, and you did it long enough that self-authority replaced effort. That is the final chapter, not discipline as struggle, not discipline as achievement, but discipline as governance, quiet, internal, unshakable, and once it is yours, nothing external can take it away. Everything you've listened to comes down to one uncomfortable truth. Nobody was ever going to save you from yourself. Not motivation, not talent, not timing, not luck. The only thing that ever stood between you and a different life was whether you were willing to govern your behavior when nobody was watching. Private discipline was never about becoming impressive. It was about becoming dependable. Dependable to yourself first, because once you break trust with yourself often enough, nothing external can compensate for that damage. No success feels stable, no confidence feels real, no achievement lasts. You've seen how motivation lies, how silence sharpens, how standards reveal who you really are, how pain without an audience hardens you, how delayed identity keeps you honest, how boredom filters the serious from the curious, how discipline matures into protection, refinement, continuity, and finally self-authority. What connects all of it is this: the work that changes you happens when there is no immediate reward for doing it. Most people never accept that. They keep searching for systems that feel good, habits that feel exciting, and progress that feels visible. When those feelings disappear, so do they. That's why so many lives plateau early and quietly decay afterward. You chose a different path by staying. Private discipline didn't ask you to be extreme. It asked you to be consistent. It didn't ask you to suffer loudly. It asked you to endure quietly. It didn't ask you to become someone overnight. It asked you to protect standards long enough that identity followed naturally. If there is one thing to remember, it's this: discipline is not something you use to control life. It is something you use to control yourself, so life cannot control you. There will be days when nothing feels meaningful, days when progress is invisible, days when breaking your own rules would have no obvious consequence. Those are not setbacks. Those are the moments where discipline is actually being built. When no one is watching, you are free to reveal who you really are. Weakness hides there. So does strength. The difference is what you choose to tolerate. This audiobook was never meant to hype you up. It was meant to strip excuses away, to replace emotional dependency with structure, to replace chaos with alignment, to give you something that does not disappear when circumstances change. Private discipline gives you a spine, not arrogance, not aggression, stability. And stability is rare. When life becomes unpredictable, disciplined people don't panic. When pressure rises, they don't fragment. When comfort increases, they don't rot. They adapt because they are governed internally. That is the quiet advantage nobody talks about. You will not always feel strong. You will not always feel clear. You will not always feel motivated. None of that matters if your standards remain intact. Standards are what carry you through phases when feelings fail. If you walk away with anything, let it be this. Stop negotiating with yourself. Decide who you are willing to be when nobody is watching, and then enforce that decision without drama. No announcement, no performance, no validation, just consistency, because what you build in private does not need to be defended in public. And once discipline becomes part of how you live, not something you try to summon, it doesn't leave you, it stays. Long after motivation fades, long after nobody is watching, long after the noise moves on, that is private discipline, and that is why it works.